going to use this poem, Mediterranean Blue, by Naomi Shahib. She writes autobiographical poetry as well as fictional poetry. Nye is a poet and songwriter who was born in 1952 to a Palestinian father and American mother and local interest. She grew up in St. Louis, Missouri. They then moved to Jerusalem, and she ended up in San Antonio, Texas, which is where she spent most of her youth and subsequent adulthood. So, Mediterranean Blue. As I'm reading this, listen for aspects of the story that are sort of moral in nature, as well as that paint a picture. And then I'll tell you how this poem connects to some major issues in ethics today. Mediterranean Blue by Naomi Shahib. If you are a child of a refugee, you do not sleep easily when they are crossing the sea on small rafts, and you know they can't swim. My father couldn't swim either. He swam through sorrow, though, and made it to the other side on a ship, pitching his old clothes overboard at landing, then tried to be happy, make a new life. But something inside him was always paddling home, clinging to anything that floated, a story, a food, or face. They are the bravest people on earth right now. Don't dare look down on them. Each mind a universe, swirling as many details as yours, as much love for a humble place. Now the shirt is torn, the sea too wide for comfort, and nowhere to receive a letter for a very long time. And if we can reach out a hand, we better. All right. So this poem could have been written today about the refugee crisis. You may have seen news stories about migrant ships wrecked in the sea between North Africa or the Middle East and the coasts of Europe. You may have seen even the heart-wrenching pictures of children and adults washed up on shore as they've drowned. But there's almost always a refugee crisis in the world. You can look up the World Health Organization or the United Nations numbers for internally displaced persons. These are people who have no place in their own country for various reasons. Right now in the United States, there are tens of thousands of internally displaced persons as a result of the forest fires out west, in California in particular. There are also people who are internationally displaced, who are seeking a permanent land that is safer than the one they came from. One of the issues here is raised right at the end. Right? If we can reach out a hand, we better. Right? So she tries to sort of create this image of the danger of being a refugee, this longing for home, and then is really very explicit about talking to you, the audience, about how refugees are just like you. Right? Don't dare look down on them. Each mind a universe, swirling as many details as yours, as much love for a humble place. Right? And if we can reach out a hand, we better. So there's this kind of sense of an obligation to help people. In philosophy and ethics, we call this a duty of rescue. And the duty of rescue is hotly debated. It comes up in innumerable situations. It comes up in things like this with refugees. It comes up in whether or not you ought to intervene if you see two people fighting. It comes up in whether or not, if you are not at risk from COVID, you have a duty to engage in actions that will reduce other people's risk from COVID, like by wearing masks and things like that. And it comes up in certain interpretations of abortion, where pregnancy is viewed as a kind of rescue of the fetus. And the issue is are there any limits on our duties of rescue? And it comes up in human, non-human animal ethics. So what do we owe to our pets? What do we owe to non-human animals who are part of the environment who are affected by our actions, things like this. So the duty of rescue is really encapsulated in this, and she's essentially making a case that we do have this duty of rescue. Now, you may not be persuaded by this. It's not a classic argument, but this narrative is being used to lay out this kind of very clear principle that there is something that we owe to others when they're in this kind of distress.